Do you want a book to help improve your relationship? Then this month's book therapy pick is for you. My name is Diana Garcia. I'm a licensed mental health counselor in Florida, owner of a private practice called Nurturing Minds Counseling. If you're new around here, my book therapy series is where I pick one mental health self-help book to recommend, review, and pick out 3 key insights just in case you never get to pick up the book. All right, as you can see from the screen, this month's pick is The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work by Dr. John Gottman and Nan Silver. Dr. Gottman is a pretty popular researcher in the field of couples therapy. He's done extensive research into couples therapy or couples and relationships, what makes couples work. This book is really based off of all his research, as well as he also has, him and his wife have the sound house therapy, which is a model that's also used in couples therapy, which I use as well. As you can see from the summary, he goes into his general research, the love lab. What that is they got couples to agree to go to an apartment for a couple days, a weekend, and they pretty much were videotaping these couples like through an extended weekend and encouraging them to act normal, act as if they were just kind of having a normal weekend at home. And they were videotaping their interactions. I think at points they also had them connected to monitor their heart rates, just to see throughout their interactions if that changed. And later that him and his team would analyze all the interactions, and that's really where he got the bulk of his research and his ongoing research as well. So what he talks about as well in the book is some things to steer clear of. One prominent thing that he talks about is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which I'm not going to go over because I did a video on that. You can check out this link here, as well as just other things to kind of look out for. But in general, the majority of the book is going through his 7 principles. So as you can see here listed, here are the 7 different principles that he says really are what makes marriages work and last in the long run. So each principle has a chapter that's dedicated to it. There's questionnaires about like kind of self-questionnaires for you and your partner to do to see kind of, is this a strength in your relationship or is this an area of growth? And then there's exercises to actually help you improve, whether it's an area of growth or if it's just a strength, to how to continue keeping it a priority or a strength. He talks about that all these different levels are really essential to kind of having a happy, stable, long-term relationship. Clearly in today's video, I can't go through each and every principle, so I just picked out 3 insights from different parts of the book. Insight number 1, it's really an exercise. So this is really meant to bolster principle 2, nurturing your fondness and admiration for your partner. So this really talks about one key principle is really making sure that you're kind of, when you think about your partner, when you're looking at your partner, you're really appreciating and noticing like their positive traits and qualities. He talks about that over time you can get into what's called negative sentiment override with your partner, where you start to kind of ignore the good things and you just focus on the negative things that are going on, as well as things that are maybe neutral automatically get kind of looped into the negative stuff. So if your partner says like, hey honey, did you forget to pay the bill? In a curious way, you automatically perceive it as like they're criticizing you, they're being negative and so forth. And maybe they are, but again, this negative sentiment override talks about that. You really tend to shift to that perspective. So one key way to shift that or change that is to really start practicing like this exercise in the book that he goes, I appreciate. In the book, he kind of gives you a list of a whole bunch of different traits that you can pick out and appreciate if you don't have the book. Really how I typically encourage my couples to do this is just being intentional about noticing 3 daily kind of appreciations towards your partner. And I typically tell my couples the more specific, the better. So typically, like if your partner that day, brought you your coffee, right? And maybe that's a daily thing, but just kind of noticing and appreciating that. Maybe your partner like really pitched in with the kids that day, right? Maybe he decided to do like, all the bedtime routine so you could relax because you were really stressful. So really noticing that. And then picking at time at some point in the day, ideally when it's just you two having quality time, maybe right before you're going to bed, or you're just chilling out on the couch, and really turning to your partner and sharing your 3 kind of appreciations for them. Like, I appreciate X, Y, and Z, right? And so continually doing that daily, and I know that might seem like daily, but yes, you really want to start to nurture this fondness and admiration towards your partner, because that's really going to start to shift your perspective and engagement towards them. Again, I know this can be really difficult if you're going through a hard time with your partner or you guys have been stuck in a lot of conflict, but this is something that you really want to do to kind of buffer some of the difficulties that you're having. thumbs up if you're going to commit to this exercise. So you're committing to doing these 3 daily acts of appreciation towards your partner for a good period of time. Give me a thumbs up to tell me you are committing to this in your relationship. Okay, 2 principles from the 7 different principles. One of them is principle 5, solving your solvable problems, and then principle 6, overcoming gridlock. So that's talking about how you engage in conflict or disagreement. And so the first piece that he talks about is distinguishing between these 2 different types of conflicts. So there's perpetual problems and there's solvable problems. Perpetual problems are probably ongoing issues that you've probably had with your partner, probably at some point since you started dating, in terms of like in a committed relationship, and you will probably have some version of this disagreement for the good portion, if not forever, of your relationship. And part of that reason is that these kind of perpetual problems are typically related to core differences in personality styles, values, dreams, and just some really concrete differences of opinions that really make up each of who you are, right? And he talks about in his research that 69% of marital conflicts fall into this category, right? So for some people, when I tell this with my couple, some of them have a sense of relief, because it's a sense of like, okay, so maybe these really difficult issues that we've had, they're not necessarily, we don't have to solve them, we just need to learn how to have a conversation and dialogue around them. Now, and that's the really key part that he talks about, like the masters of conversation, the masters that he calls like these couples that have done really well. Doesn't mean that they don't necessarily have these perpetual problems. They have them, but they found a way to talk about them. And they've had some way of compromise throughout their relationship on these different issues. And the compromises might look different through different points of their lives and relationships, but they acknowledge that this is just something that will probably always be part of their lives, right? The other type of conflict are solvable problems. So these can be problems that are a little bit more simple, but not always, and they can still cause a lot of deal of pain. So these can be some more just like solvable, concrete, like you can figure out how to solve this problem. Again, similarly though, if you're getting stuck in how you're having a communication, and going back to the 4 horsemen, if you're like engaging in certain types of conversations that are getting you really stuck, maybe sometimes it's hard to even acknowledge that the solvable problems are actually solvable, right? So the first piece is just acknowledging that there's these 2 types of different problems. Okay, the third key insight is learning the difference between harsh versus softened startups. And why this is really important, he has a stat in the book, and I'm just going to check it just to make sure I'm quoting it right. 96% of time, you can predict the outcome of a conversation based on the first 3 minutes of a 15-minute conversation. So in other words, based on how the conversation has started, the first 3 minutes are most likely going to predict the outcome of that whole conversation. So he really talks about the difference and the importance of using softened startups versus harsh startups. So harsh startups are typically more like there's a lot of criticism, contempt, blame, maybe there's escalated tone, maybe there's even like, some yelling, right? It's just how you approach this conversation. Versus a softened startup, it's really different. It's the different intention behind it. The intention is still to express how you're feeling, but it's really also to make sure that your partner can hear it, right? So it's a little bit softened, and I'm going to go through some guidelines that he goes through, but here's some examples. So for instance, like a harsh startup would be, you never pay attention to me. Versus a softened startup would be, I've been missing your affection lately. I feel unimportant, right? So there is a complaint that you're having in there, but not necessarily criticism or contempt. Then another example is, let's say your partner spent money on the credit card and didn't tell you. It could be like, I saw you splurge on yourself again. What were you even going to tell me? You're so inconsiderate. Right? Versus like, hey baby, I noticed a new charge in our account. I'm feeling a little nervous about our extra spending. Can we talk about this? Right? So just the whole manner and approach of how you approach your partner is completely different. Now, granted, I know you're going to tell me like, well, if I'm feeling upset about something, then I'm going to approach my partner in a really harsh startup. Well, you could do that, but you really need to acknowledge that that's probably not going to turn out well. Going back to that stat, right? It's not going to turn out to get you the results that you want. Your partner's more likely to either shut down, get defensive, right? And you guys are just going to get stuck in a disagreement. So this is something that both partners can really practice, this softened startup. Here's some general guidelines, and in the book, he kind of goes through and gives more examples. But number 1, complain, but steer clear from blaming. So a complaint is you're bringing up a concern, you're bringing up how you're feeling about something, but you're not blaming them. right? And so there's a distinct difference. The second is really focusing on using I statements versus you statements. So if I'm going to go back to this screen, right, you never pay attention to me versus I've been missing you or your affection, I feel unimportant, right? So an I statement would be, I feel blank when X, Y, and Z happens, right? So you're really focusing on your feelings versus you do this or that. The next one is just describe what is happening without judging. An example, so instead of judging, you're like, what were you doing? You're so inconsiderate, right? Like at that point, you're judging, you're getting into this kind of criticism mode versus in the second example, you're just kind of describing what happened, right? I noticed a new charge on our account, and then you're also focusing on your feelings and feeling really nervous about this extra spending. Clearly state your positive need, right? So what do you need in this interaction based on this situation? Like, don't assume that they know. Be polite and appreciative. So something he talks about is that one just key principle of having a happy, stable marriage is treating your partner with basic respect, meaning like treating your partner like you would treat other people. Typically, we tend to at times be more kind and polite to other people, maybe outside of our families or our partners. We tend to let our guard down. And so he really talks about kind of going back to the basics and being polite and appreciative, just like you are with other people outside of your home. And the last one is don't store things up. So really don't wait till you've had like 5 different instances where you're like fuming, and so that's making it really hard for you to have a softened startup because there's like 5 things that are just about to you're about to explode, and it's just that one thing that really just comes all tumbling out where your partner might be completely unaware. So he does talk about like addressing these different issues when they're actually happening. Yes in the comments below to let me know that you're committing to practicing softened startups. So this is really important. Regardless if you're dealing with perpetual or solvable issues, softened startups is a really key important part. So type yes to tell me you are going to try to implement these different guidelines in your relationship. I highly recommend this book because I think there's so many good exercises, stats, questionnaires, and I always tell couples, you don't have to do this just because your relationship's in trouble. This can just be a way to level up your relationship. Now, the one thing I will note is that he talks a lot about like kind of gender roles, and like he does sometimes say like based on his research, men are more likely to do this, women are more likely to do this. So maybe that might feel a little off-putting for some people, but he does talk about like, you know, you apply it to whoever in your relationship does this, or if both of you do this. So the one thing that I encourage you is I will encourage you to watch this video next, as this has the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So this also is the things that you should not be doing based on his research. That's also in the book that I didn't get to go over today. And as always, I encourage you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul, whatever that looks like for you guys. Thanks.